Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My role is to really welcome you to the CPUT Belleville campus and to this inaugural public lecture, which we do in cooperation with the Cape Times. This is one of the activities that embraces the cooperation. The other aspect relates to internships, part-time lecturing, and so on and so on. I was told that it is the first partnership between a publication house and a university. So a very hearty welcome to all of you. I also want to welcome everyone who's joining us via the video live streaming this evening. It is our hope that this occasion marks the series of lectures which will be focused on topical and newsworthy issues. This may be the first time some of you are visiting here today. If that is the case, you may recognize that this campus as the scene of some of the violent protest action which rocked the entire higher education system last year. Set against that backdrop of the education crisis, and in particular, the recent constitutional ruling that our president failed to uphold and defend the Constitution, a discussion of the nature we're about to have this evening could not be more timeless. The Constitution has never been more sharply in the public discourse than it is right now. As we grapple as a nation with these constitutional issues and crises, South Africa, more than ever before, is concerned about the state of our country and where we are headed. These are difficult and uncomfortable conversations that are critical for us as a nation to grow. And tonight, we are very privileged as an institution to have two of the sons of South Africa, Judge Albie Sachs, who I believe does not require any introduction, and our very own Dr. Franklin Sonn, who has been at the helm of this institution for quite some time. I also like to welcome Prof. van der Roos, who's sitting here with us today. He's been asking me, who are you? Who are you? So I said, I'm Prince. I'm Prince. Prof. van der Roos, welcome to your university. This evening will not have been possible without our media partner, the Cape Times. When I went to visit the editor, I said to him that we want to try and create a different culture and tradition at CPUT, where these discourses become part of our own culture, where every month we should have something interesting, not only for us, for the public and for the students, to engage our staff, to engage our students, so that when they emerge here, when our students emerge from this institution, they are much more all-rounded. They're not only technical, but they're all-rounded because they've been exposed to different discourses. This is a humble beginning, and we have to get the culture going of people, of our academics, getting interested in this kind of lecture series. Collaborating on this event has been a pleasure, and we hope it marks the start of a very fruitful relationship for both of us. I was talking to my colleague, the deputy editor, and we were sharing sweets. We're eating something together, like sharing bread. This is what partnership is all about, where you can share things, where you can agree. To everyone working behind the scenes, we appreciate your efforts. I hope by the end of this evening, we will pause and reflect on how far we have come, how far we have to go, and what we can do personally to take this great nation of ours to the heights we all know that it can reach. Once again, thank you for braving this rainy, cold autumn weather this evening to join us. And thank you, and hope you enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor. I should have acknowledged in my greeting, because I've been told there's an increasing number of people coming online, viewing the proceedings via streaming via the internet. So I'd like to take this opportunity to greet everybody who is listening to these proceedings via cyberspace. Good evening to you. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Vice-Chancellor just indicated, we're very proud to have entered into this partnership with the Cape Times. It's a unique partnership. We have common ground in developing the public lecture series, and it gives me great pleasure to ask the Deputy Editor of the Cape Times, Mr. Aziz Hartley, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Give him a round of applause.
Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you can hear me. Firstly, greetings from our editor and the editorial staff at the Cape Times. I'm here. I'm lucky, but the others are not. They have a paper to put to bed. The Cape Times is honored to be associated with the lecture series CPUT has initiated. For us, we regard it as a vital discourse in our country. We are facing many, many challenges, as we all know, constitutionally, politically, socially. It's only early this week that Stats SA released findings that showed that African colored and youth are still lagging way, way behind. And you know what is called a ticking time bomb. And this is what we put in our editorial just a couple of days ago. And despite this, this is despite, us being in a democratic dispensation 2 decades old, if not more. CPUT caters mainly for those youth, so we believe that the role of this university is vital. We have already seen students at CPUT and at all other institutions rise up for free education. And that is a call that the Cape Times endorses. We were first to report extensively on the Roads Must Fall movement, even though our detractors, some of them unashamedly subliminal racist, ridiculed us for what they call publishing this small story on the front page. We were also lambasted for our coverage on racism. Today, as we all know, racism and the issue of students are top of the country's agenda. And at the heart of all this, there's a dire need for dialogue about these matters. We have to learn to talk to each other far more. And if we are to rid our country of corruption, we have to live in a democratic, non-racial and non-sexist and prosperous society. That's why the CPUT and the Cape Times lecture series are so vital. This series dovetails with the ethos of the Cape Times, and that is to be a voice for all. And we are saying that we congratulate the Vice Rector, Prince Novatolo, and his staff for having initiated this series. We really welcome it, and it's a pleasure for us to be part of this. And we look forward to hearing, and we will publish the many fine views that we hope will be expressed here. And we are also confident that this series will also help to reach what all of us long for, and that is a better South Africa. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartley. Ladies and gentlemen, so now we're about to get on to the important things in the evening. Before we jump into that, I thought perhaps I need to give a little bit of context. The Vice-Chancellor, in saying welcome, did frame what this event is about. And I just want to extend that a little bit. And behind this public lecture series, as we're calling it right now, is the notion that the social contract between higher education and society is evolving and changing. In the South African context, the National Development Plan points us into that 2030 direction, and CPUT is cognizant of that. And the idea behind this is that CPUT recognizes its role as being a socially engaged university. We are already carving our niche in terms of the key areas of our mandate, in terms of our excellent teaching and learning programs, the types of graduates that are entering society, in terms of our community engagement, and important in terms of research and innovation. And we are being socially engaged in different ways, including through, for example, service learning projects in which staff and students are distinguishing themselves across the province, through a policy which we call research uptake, in which every single bit of our research would find its way beyond publications and theses. So we are engaging in those ways. But this takes it a step further. CPUT is saying that we will also engage in things that matter to ourselves and the community at large. And this public lecture series demonstrates that. It demonstrates a willingness of this institution to be part of the broader society in which it places itself. Now, we've called this the Vice-Chancellor's Public Lecture Series. And of course, the word lecture evokes a number of thoughts, and for those of you who've been through university and other means of learning would have an idea of lectures. But as part of this ethos of who CPUT is, these lectures are taking place more in the form of conversations, to stimulate a discourse around things which we think are important. So we did not think that it was a good idea to invite esteemed guests here to prepare a long monologue, to deliver it, and then take questions. So what we are doing this evening breaks from the mold. Our public lectures series are, in this inaugural one, taking the form of a conversation. We want to stimulate debate, stimulate discourse. So what we are going to do for the rest of this evening then is we will create this opportunity, this platform for our esteemed guests, Judge Sachs and Dr. Sonn, to engage in a conversation. They are going to engage in a conversation and we are going to observe. But do not just observe, we are going to listen carefully, let that evoke thoughts, and there will be an opportunity to then engage with both of them after the conversation takes place. And that's going to be the format for the evening. I was going to read out a small biography of each of our esteemed colleagues here. It was in the invitation. I'm sure they are known well enough to all of you, so I'm going to skip that part. So the format is going to be like that. We have a broad guideline of times in which they are going to engage in the conversation, but they will indicate when they feel they have conversed enough. So my request to you, as the Vice-Chancellor pointed out, the topic for today is really critical. It touches to the heart of issues around education, touches to the heart around many other matters of life. And I don't want to steal the thunder and talk about the Constitution, but listen carefully. The conversation is going to evoke key questions. And when it comes to question times, I'm saying let us be frank, let's be honest, because a place of higher learning is a place where we ask the difficult questions. So let's ask the difficult questions, let's engage in a meaningful discourse this evening. So with those few words, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now hand over to Judge Sachs and to Dr. Sonn to commence with their conversation. And I believe Dr. Sonn is going to start off by posing hopefully not very easy questions to Dr. Sachs. So thank you very much, and let's give everybody a round warm of applause.
I just want to, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm so happy that more of you turned up than was the case when we came in. And I shared a joke with Albie, and I believe this conversation, in order to be informal and relaxed, is going to be very much on first-name terms. And I know you're all very, very comfortable with that. So I shared a joke with my colleagues here of the indomitable Desmond Tutu wanting, on a platform, going out of his way to take the mickey out of me and see if I will get embarrassed. And we had done so. I said, now it's my turn to tell you a story about this man. It's the custom among those of you who know the Anglican Church, that Anglican Church has a king, and that's the Archbishop. And when he comes to visit a parish, then it's expected that that is a very special day. Long notice is given, and then everybody knows on that day, the Archbishop is here. New clothes are being donned, and baking is happening, and everybody comes to the church. So one rainy day, it was the turn of a town in the West Coast, and the Archbishop arrived with all his regalia and so on, and eventually they went up to the altar with a presiding priest. And then when he looked across, he just saw about a handful of fuddy-duddies, old people sitting there. And this doesn't go well with the ego of an archbishop. I told the story. And then he in the irate way, turned to the presiding priest and he said, "Brother, did you tell the people that I'm coming?" So this bedraggled brother, the priest said, "No, Father, but word must have gotten out." So both of us were sort of worried that word had gotten out and people decided not to come. So please, thank you very much for being here.
I can say I was worried when I saw the Cape Times using the headline "Struggle Heroes."
Yeah.
I thought no one's going to come.
Yeah.
They are so boring, and they give us lectures and homilies and how marvelous things were in the old days and how terrible things are now.
And how we suffered. You see, even Albie is maimed too, and so you wanted. When they heard that, they thought, no, they're not coming. And also the language, Albie, has changed because Professor Pather, or Sonn, he stood up there and he spoke, "Ask questions." That's the language he used. And go into the matters. Now, that's not language that we know from those days. The language is you must interrogate. You must unpack. And you must enter into a discourse. Now, that's the language. So even that's changed. But ladies and gentlemen, that being said, this is actually, as you say, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, it is very propitious for us to have this discussion. Because it's not only propitious, it's critical, Albie, very critical. Because I think it's probably now, through the publicity in an inverted way, the President reignited our interest in this thing called the Constitution. First, we were beguiled by President Mandela, who very much brought the nation together and got all the praise and honor for it, forgetting that amongst other people, yourselves and others, were all participating. And all of us, I can remember, also facing some very, very hard times and pushing through with what then was called the struggle. And so out of that cauldron, the Constitution was born, and we just went on with our life, just with another president and another situation. In fact, I was out of the country for most of the beginning days of the democracy. And all of a sudden now, there's an interest in the Constitution. And people want to know about the Constitution. And I hope that coming out of this evening, people will know not only what the spirit of the Constitution is, not only what the letter of the Constitution is, not only its place in our new society, but the responsibility that that places on each one of us to uphold, guard, and protect the Constitution. And take that responsibility personally and not expect anyone to do it on our behalf. And I hope also for the students that are here, that they also will, as you invited, Mr. Vice-Chancellor, make this their debate. I want to make use of this as a former rector. I want to make use of this opportunity to say the following. And I'm safely ensconced in my home. Don't open doors if people come and bang on it. But we must ask questions, for example, that are we revolutionaries, as students like to call themselves? Are the people who delivered this Constitution eventually, are the people to whom who owns this Constitution, are they true revolutionaries? Do they own the Constitution? Are they proud of South Africa when they burn trains, when they smash campuses to get their way? My take would be, if I understand the Constitution properly, and also all the underlying elements of the Constitution. If I read Tambo, this wonderful book of Sunday Dry, on Tambo, this would have given him a second stroke had he still been alive. We must protect our assets. We must protect our gains. We cannot destroy it. Doesn't matter what the reason is. There's no heroism in that. And I think right at the outset, I want to make that statement. That
Franklin, can I?
Yeah, but let me just,
okay.
Yeah, let me just, I'll give you a chance, Albie. I just want to say, we must be, as Albie also insisted we are, that we are very, very direct, and that we capture the soul of the Constitution. But now,
before you even ask the question, and you're not the rector now, and I'm not the judge now, it's Albie and Franklin. I think you're absolutely right to point to, and what hurt me more than anything was the burning of paintings. They are so inflammable. But these were paintings by the first black artist to get a master's degree at Michaelis, paintings of Murray Blackburn, who was one of our heroes, one of our ancestors. But that's just one part of the story. It's the most visible part. What captures me is this idealism, there's passion, there are people asking serious questions, they're linking up with workers, they're interested in a whole range of questions. And when I spoke to students at the University of Cape Town a couple of weeks ago, I said, it sounds like the height of narcissism, but I see 200 young Albie Sachses there, because they have some of that fire and passion we had when we were young. Ons was die klipgooiers. We were the klipgooiers of that time. And so what you bring out is absolutely right, because they are the people who do the things you mentioned are undermining the core goal of it. But that's not the main story. That's the peripheral story that's damaging to their endeavor. And I'm thrilled to see that the average age when we walked in was around about 75. It's gone down to about 45. So there are young people here, and that will really get, the term used these days, ignite. Ignite. We don't want to ignite too much now, but everything ignites things. Okay, first question to you.
But Albie, perhaps we should have a logical progress in the discussion and start, because this is also something which I have an inkling that people don't understand fully. Ask a question about the genesis, not of the Constitution as such, but the genesis of the spirit of the Constitution, which in fact was merely, the flesh was merely filled into the bones. I read, for example, Oliver Tambo spent, I think, 10 years of his time in London and Lusaka, developing what he called the liberation philosophy, based on the Freedom Charter, which then found expression in the Constitution. And perhaps you are probably very well placed to talk to us about the genesis and the spirit within this wonderful document of this called the South African Constitution.
When I'm asked to speak about the Constitution, I love throwing out the question, if you did a paternity test on our Constitution, whose DNA would come up?
Yes.
And I was actually sitting with, F.W. de Klerk was on that side of me and somebody else on the other side. And I said, it's no one in this room, just in case he had any hopes. And there's dead silence. I said, it's not Nelson Mandela. Complete silence. I said, Oliver Tambo. Yeah. And this was, I saw it at firsthand now. I still had two arms then. I'm in Lusaka. Constitutional Committee of the ANC has been set up, and we're discussing a future constitution. And Oliver Tambo asked me to report to the National Executive of the ANC. What does it mean to have a constitution? What is a constitution? I mean, here are people, mixed degrees of schooling, some graduates, but we'd been fighting a constitution that was racist and oppressive and rotten. The Constitution of South Africa was our enemy. We were against the Constitution. The 1983 Constitution, as it was called, we were totally against it. And I put to the meeting of the NEC, there are three prototypes. We can have a classical American-style constitution, which separates powers, but more or less freezes the status quo against government doing anything that interferes as a team of the rights of the people. We can have a people's power constitution. Many of us were living in Mozambique, Angola, people's power. You seize power, you unite the people, workers and peasants and progressive intellectuals. Seems overcoming racism, tribalism, regionalism is a very powerful idea. And you move forward to transform society. One party. And then one party is leading society. Or I said, you can have a post-dictatorship constitution. Post-dictatorship, that's what we wanted. People didn't, they were fearful of the idea of a constitution that would simply be a mechanism for freezing the status quo. You can't touch property, you can't touch anything that's happening now. Give everybody the vote, but the constitution prevents change from happening. They were worried about that. But we'd lived in countries with one party leading the state, and we'd seen opposition doesn't disappear. It goes underground, gets caught up in the Cold War, civil war, it's unsustainable. And our Freedom Charter spoke about rights for everybody. So we wanted a constitution, but a constitution that was emancipatory. At Natal, University of Natal then, black students set up an anti-Bill of Rights committee. What? We're fighting for freedom, we're against the Bill of Rights? Somebody called it the Bill of Whites. And I was asked by Oliver Tambo now to explain what is a Bill of Rights. And I said, a Bill of Rights can be very conservative. No change, can't touch anything, no takings. Fundamental freedoms, as they exist at that moment, stay forever. Or a Bill of Rights can include social economic rights, gender rights, children's rights, rights for workers. And we can't allow a Bill of Rights to be monopolized by the people who see it as a purely negative instrument against government. We've got to make the Bill of Rights an emancipatory instrument. So we all now in the ANC started talking about a Bill of Rights. And I remember at one conference, we probably had Zambian troops around us in case commandos came to take us out, and we're discussing a Bill of Rights. And I was asked, my heart's going boom, 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 boom. Bill of Rights, of course we fought a Bill of Rights. It makes us look good. We're not these crazy revolutionaries who want to seize power and so on. You do it for tactical reasons. But a Bill of Rights was Oliver Tambo's basic answer to group rights. Do you remember group rights? We would have had rights for Zulus and rights for Afrikaners and rights for whites. We would have had, honestly, until 1992 in the negotiations, the then government were pushing for 3 presidents, Mandela on Monday, de Klerk on Tuesday, and Buthelezi on Wednesday. Quite seriously, representing, they then called it political parties, but we knew it would be racial groups, ethnic groups. So Oliver Tambo's answer to group rights, and people saying power sharing, that's the way to go. And it sounded so correct to people in the world outside. Blacks are fighting whites, let them share power together and neither must oppress the others. Thank you very much. That's great for the whites. They've got 87% of the land, 95% productive capital, and we will share power. Nothing can change. Great. Everything has to be done by consensus. It would have been a disaster, a disaster. So that was Oliver Tambo's basic, strategic, conceptual answer to group rights. And when the constitutional negotiations broke down in 1992, only technically it was over 70%, 66 and 2/3% for alterations. Substantially, there was a total clash of vision for what our country should be, a non-racial constitution that recognizes language, cultural, religious rights, that protects rights for people not because they're black, not because they're white, not because they speak this language or that language, not because they're majority, not because they're minority, because they're human beings. That's what we do to protect the rights of people. That was the second reason. My heart's not going boom, 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 because that's so logical. And we had to fight very hard to get that theme through, and that is the cornerstone of our Constitution today. But the third reason, I said, and now I'm worried, what will the comrades say? Okay, for Albie Sachs, the lawyer, white guy, comfortable life. I still had 2 arms then. I said we need a Bill of Rights against ourselves. And I was fearful. And I saw looks of delight. You know, that somebody on behalf of the organization was saying that we are capable of failing. And we need a Bill of Rights, and we need constitutional protection against ourselves. And when the recent decisions came out, I remembered that. I remembered when I came back from exile and I gave my inaugural lecture at UCT. It opened with 2 sentences. The beautiful people are not yet born. A wonderful phrase from a Nigerian writer after independence, taken over in Zimbabwe after independence. And we're saying the beautiful people are not yet born. And then the second sentence of the inaugural lecture was, a rich man's fart smelled sweet. And that I got from Ngugi Viatongo. And we were aware at the time, we need a constitution, we need protections, not only to bring about transformation, but against ourselves. And so these were the themes that Oliver Tambo was encouraging us to deal with, to convert the Freedom Charter from being a program, a vision, into an operational document for a new society.
Can I, flowing from that, just a bit of information about the genesis and the spirit that informed the Constitution, even before it was written, flowing from, of course, the tenets of the Freedom Charter. May I quiz you about something very interesting to think of? Is how is it possible that Oliver Tambo and the people around him were overseas somewhere, whether it's Lusaka or London? Nelson Mandela was in prison, where the people also along with him. And then there was the rest of us in South Africa. How is it possible that, particularly between these 2 heroes, Tambo and Mandela, there could be such complete synergy, and also between the exiles and the imprisoned, when the whole system was designed to separate that from themselves? And it's always something which I feel we need to prod a bit to understand what we call the marvelous resolution of the South African conflict at the time.
I think it's myself, just thinking as I'm sitting here, it's to do with personality to a certain point, but it wasn't Tambo and it wasn't Mandela who made this culture of embracing others. It was that culture that made them. And what's significant is they rose to the top in those days because that's really what people wanted. They were aching for a vision of a country. And I felt so strongly with OR that his philosophy, why we didn't go in for terrorism, for example, when a lot of the younger people were saying, until the whites bury their children, until they feel our pain, they'll never let go. And he was saying, we don't use terrorism. Why he was against the use of torture by ANC, against captives. We don't use, because if we do those things, it's not only we'll never have a country, then you can forget about it. What are we doing to ourselves? If we become instruments of death. And it was his enormous confidence that he had. The whites in South Africa were too narrow-minded, too greedy, too insular, too self-referential to ever imagine the country belonging to everybody. We African people who've suffered in our bones so much for being who we are, we will show everyone in our country, we'll show the world it is possible to live together. They say it's impossible. And this was out of strength, not out of weakness. We African people have a humanity and a vision and a strength of doing things that is superior to the narrowness, the divisiveness of the others. And that actually kept us going. That deep moral principle, not out of some abstract notion, is an enormous strength. It so happened that Tambo and Mandela and Tambo were law partners. They had a wonderful relationship with each other. In Mozambique, where they had Samora Machel was the leader. Everybody knew he was the leader. They couldn't understand that the ANC could have two leaders. It seemed against the logic of revolutionary struggle. So I met OR. This was round about the time we were discussing the Bill of Rights. And I mentioned the problems the Mozambicans had. And I said, who is the leader? And immediately he said, Nelson Mandela is the leader. Afterwards, I met Nelson Mandela. Even although OR was very weak and frail, I told him that story. He said, Oliver Tambo is the leader. It was just for me. It wasn't for the press. It wasn't to make a point. But they had that feeling of the struggle, the vision, the goal is everything. If we can play a particular role as leaders. And of course, they had some secret communication, which Mac Maharaj talks about. They smuggled in a little radio. People were coming off the island. One reason that Madiba was moved to Pollsmoor and then on his own was to try and prevent the prisoners who were going off the island and new prisoners coming in, providing information. But I believe it was that deep moral philosophy, and it fitted in with the needs. When you have an industrialized country where people work together, they're dependent on each other, even if the relationships are totally unjust in that country, we still need each other. And they felt for the great majority of black people who've been excluded from education, from access, from skills, the whites must contribute their skills and their knowledge for the benefit of everybody. And that will be to our benefit while we are learning and getting ahead and advancing. So I think it was that kind of philosophy. At the same time, willingness to pick up a gun when it was necessary. Mandela, people say he's Mr. Nice Guy. Come on. He could be very rough and very tough. He pointed a finger at, pointing a finger at you, but at de Klerk at Codesa, this man is not to be trusted.
Is he legitimate?
And he grabbed one of the warders on prison, and the comrades had to pull him back. He just lost it. And I saw OR at the great conference we had in Kabwe, and he was saying, "My Shlomi," but he didn't convince me that he was a soldier. You know, he wouldn't. If I was the enemy, I wouldn't have been frightened by him. But that was the war cry of the people of the Eastern Cape. And so it wasn't an easy ride. And even the constitution making, you know, Franklin, it's projected now as though the saintly, marvelous Nelson Mandela comes out of prison with no anger in his heart, and he meets the wise, pragmatic de Klerk, and they do a deal together. We spent 6 years on that constitution. There were breakdowns. There was rolling mass action. Chris Hani was assassinated, the country almost exploded. More people died in political violence from 1990 to 1994 than from 1910 to 1990. There was low-grade civil war, people being thrown off the trains. It was ugly. There was a third force operating. There were white soldiers putting on blackface and pretending to promote black-on-black violence. It was very, very harsh, but we never lost sight of the goal. And to de Klerk's credit, he held the ship steady on his side, and Mandela, from our side, we just had to get a constitution to enable South Africans to live together on the basis of dignified values, and then to put in place constitutional protections that really count. And so much we take for granted. We take it for granted our president steps down after 2 terms maximum. The issue now is not, will our president step down after 2 terms? Will he step down before 2 terms? Thabo Mbeki stepped down before his term was up, not because the military came into his office or there was a coup. His party voted against him. He stepped down. Now, this is kind of extraordinary in the world and in Africa. We have elections now, local government elections, and people are so excited. Where in the world are people excited about local government elections? But they have a meaning that goes beyond. And our elections are meaningful. We have a very lively press, as the Cape Times will know, not scared to ask tough questions, to interrogate, to investigate. We have a strong judiciary. I was doing some research on that period when I was saying the beautiful people are not yet born for a book of mine, of talks I've given over the years. Oh, I said that. Oh, I'm so amazed and pleased to see the smart things I said in 91, 92. And I saw in a lecture that I gave about at New York University Law School on how the Constitutional Court declared the Constitution to be unconstitutional. That was an extraordinary process. We had 2-stage process of getting a constitution. We negotiated a constitution, interim constitution for the elections. We got the elections, and now the new parliament had to adopt a final constitution according to 34 principles agreed to in advance, 2/3 majority, elections by proportional representation so that even the smallest groups could be represented, and a constitutional court to decide if the 34 principles had been agreed to. And Parliament was given 2 years to draft the new constitution, no longer than that. And of course they worked till the last night of the last day, and luckily 1996 was a leap year, so they had 1 extra day. And then they presented to us in the court. Now I'm not Comrade Albie Sachs anymore, I'm Justice Albie Sachs. And we had 10 days of argument. People from the public complaining about the Constitution doesn't meet the principles. People arguing on behalf of the Constitutional Assembly saying it does. The day comes to give judgment. Now, many of you would have been watching the other day. In those days, we couldn't get television. We longed to have it. We at least captured it on television. And we said overwhelmingly the principles have been complied with, but in 9 respects, it doesn't comply. And I saw my old comrades there, their jaw dropped longer and longer and longer as we announced things. And one of the points, this is what I'd forgotten about completely till I reread my article, the talk I gave, was one of the principles said the independence of the auditor and the public protector must be safeguarded. And the safeguard that was put into the interim constitution, into the text of the final constitution, was they can only be removed by 50% majority in Parliament, of all members of Parliament. And we said that's not enough. And so it became a 2/3 majority. So that was the kind of institutional protection we were thinking about at that stage. And who knows whether or not recent events in this country might have been different if we hadn't adopted that position. We sent it back to Parliament, they made the corrections, there were more challenges, we upheld it. But one reason why our Constitution has worked so well is that we put in an enormous amount of energy, we looked into each other's eyes, and I like to say we didn't go in for compromise. I don't like the word compromise. Compromise means you sell yourself short. We went in for accommodation. Accommodation is principled. How can we live together in one country and accommodate the legitimate interests of different people and even the fears of people who behaved abominably, but they're scared and they want to feel they've got a future in the country and they're human beings and they have a right to have a future, whatever they might have done or their ancestors might have done. We want to create that idea of equal citizenship, equal dignity for everybody. And that's how we finally got the Constitution that we got. And that's why it stood up so well. And why in so many countries I've seen in Africa, even words taken literally from our Constitution, put into other constitutions. It's become exemplary for the world of how a divided society, that the world didn't give us a chance, a racial bloodbath, there's no way out, and we got a Constitution that's now being held up as exemplary throughout the world. I feel proud, and South Africans should feel proud. Feeling proud doesn't mean you're satisfied. Then you get worried if there are threats to the Constitution. But what does worry me, frankly, quite a lot, is this idea that the Constitution was a kind of a sweetheart deal that was done. These two late middle-aged guys who both had left their wives and remarried and had a new joy in life.
They should make that constitutional. That you are
and it was a very rough, very intense, difficult process with people dying outside all the time. We just had to hold fast and we had to draw on the best of what we could get from the world. And one huge advantage we had, we'd lived everywhere. We'd lived in West Germany, we'd lived in East Germany. We'd lived in Cuba, we'd lived in the United States, in Canada, we'd lived all over Africa, we'd lived in India, we'd lived in Australia. We'd seen it firsthand. We didn't have to study books to see what worked and what didn't work. We'd lived through those experiences. When somebody from the American State Department said at the beginning of negotiations, Albie, we'd like to level the playing fields. How can we help? And they were saying, if you want to level the playing fields, help the government. Help the government, because they are way behind in terms of thinking. You don't have to try harder when you've got power.
Yeah, that was one of the advantages of that period of the 80s for the people in exile. They could see clearly that changes in the offing, and then they devoted all this time that we've now heard of, and it allowed this philosophy of liberation philosophy of O.R. Tambo to come through. And I really want to urge people to read more about Tambo. He was so self-effacing that the quality and the depth of this man's spirit didn't come through. And the democratic nature of his, that he will engage people. I read letters of his to his children and family, and he wrote passionate letters to them about how much pain he endures of not seeing them growing up because he's busy with this. And that's a kind of, we talked about spirit, that the Constitution is also a deeply spiritual document. And it's the spirit that came in. And then it leads us, and you also spoke about what we called righteous indignation. If things are wrong, they're morally wrong. If they're constitutionally wrong, if it's an affront to the spirit of the Constitution, then of course there must be a righteous indignation because it's in our hands. And that then leads us, Albie, to the, and I've seen Madiba, I teased him one day, I said, you know, you have two faces. The one is a very handsome face. That's the face that beams and smiles. But then that's that face when his jaws are locked and his skin becomes sullen and his eyes are stone And if he looks at you with that face, he's ugly because he instills fear. So I'm very happy you raised this, that there was this dual part of what constitutes a constitution. Now, coming to that, what I also would like you to dwell upon, you know that there are certain imperfections in the Constitution, like in anything, there are imperfections. And one of the imperfections that also comes to the fore, and somebody not so long ago remarked to me that the Constitution was written with Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela in mind. It wasn't written for the time when lesser kings will be on the throne. And that leads us to the question of whether constitutionally, I know there are checks and balances, but they're all not sufficient apparently. And we can perhaps name them. What are the checks and balances? Built in on power. But it wants to appear in both the case of Thabo Mbeki and now of President Zuma that the president has too much power. That this matter of the British system, the Westminster system, of appointing people at his pleasure and firing them at his pleasure without any form of redress. It's not even, you can't even take that matter to the Constitutional Court because it's constitutional. And that raises that question about our checks and balances on power. You know, it was Lord Acton who said power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what stops, in fact, we're sitting here talking about in the time when there is almost defiance of the Constitution, of both the spirit and the letter, and that is worrisome. And nowhere in the Constitution does it say, if that act, I know Parliament must do it, but in a majoritarian Parliament, it won't happen as we've seen. Now, that is a very worrying thing for South Africans. And if people worry, they become irresponsible. But worse, they become cynical. And worse, they want to take the law into their own hands. And worse, they become disloyal, not only to Zuma, but they become disloyal to the Constitution. And I think we need to interrogate that a little bit, whether it isn't a constitutional fault that the president appears to have so much power that he can almost push the country to a brink in December last year by his irrational, it looks like personally motivated actions.
You know, Franklin, I've heard similar views very widely expressed recently. A little less since the decision of the Constitutional Court, actually.
Yes.
A lot less, actually. And I think that's part of the answer.
Yes.
That's part of the answer. We had, you know, it was fantastic. Can you imagine? You're a lawyer and you're being asked to help write your country's constitution. Do you imagine it? I mean, all over the world, they're lawyers and they're not asked, given that goal, and we're given that task and responsibility. You know, I used to say, pinch me. Is it true? I'm sitting in Dublin at Kader Asmal's kitchen table, and the healing gift that the Constitutional Committee gave to me was not medicine. I came out of hospital, they said, Comrade Albie, can you help us write the first draft of the ANC's Bill of Rights? Wow, that was worth the operation. It was worth all the medication I was taking in spades. And I sat down at Kader's table. I said, no books. A Bill of Rights must come from your soul, from inside. It's fundamental rights that every human being is entitled to. We can check with the books afterwards. I couldn't believe it. What? Me? Wow. And we had many wow moments. And I must say I had a wow moment again when I watched the court, the pronouncement of the Mogoeng. And it was like a surge of exhilaration throughout the whole country, of cheering. I get stopped in the airport now. I almost missed my plane the other day. An African man came up and he was hugging me. And I had nothing to do with that case, but he associated me with the Constitution, with the court. In any event, one of the debates we had very early on was, should we follow the American presidential system, directly elected president, or should we have Parliament as the repository of our sovereignty, electing the president? And many people today are saying, if only we could elect our president directly. Are you guys crazy? Then there's no control. Then you have to wait for the 5 years. You can moan and groan and you can occupy Wall Street and you can do what you like, but you're stuck with that president. And I urged, and others very, very strongly, the repository of our sovereignty in constitutional terms should be Parliament, but Parliament subject to constitutional control. And if Parliament fails in its duty, ultimately the Constitution speaks through the courts, and that's what many people are saying happened recently. Directly elected president, what you get is two centers of power. They clash with each other. Laws aren't passed.
It's
Administration disobeyed.
It's a problem in the United States of America.
It is.
Very. It even leads to the shutdown of government when it took
Yes.
place.
So that's not the answer. Then other people speak about proportional representation. We entered into the process without any fixed ideas. We had a workshop. University of Western Cape, by the way, was very, very central to our whole constitutional endeavor. I like asking people, which were the two universities that made the biggest contribution to the Constitution? And the people say, Wits? No. UCT? No. Stellenbosch? No. Now they're running out a little bit. Natal? No. I give up. UWC and Potchefstroom. Potchefstroom, close to de Klerk. UWC, the People's University with Community Law Center, not very far from here, with Dalla Omar and Zola Squia and Kada Asmal and myself and Bridget Mabandla. We all situated there, doing an enormous amount of research. And we had workshops on themes like, the Freedom Charter doesn't speak about do you have proportional representation or districts or mixed system. We had to deal with that. And we got people from overseas, we got people not only in the ANC, academics and others, and we all came out in favor of, we had three groups, I remember, proportional representation. A, we wanted the Constitutional Assembly, the first parliament, to represent everybody. Now, even although the ANC, with 65% of the votes, would have got 85% of the seats under the district system, if we'd use the magisterial district, we said we're not interested in power, we're interested in justice and a constitution that will last for a long time. But the understanding was the first election would be PR, and the second election a mixed constituencies plus PR. The Constitution now does not exclude constituencies. So in local government, we do have wards. It just says in primarily, ultimately PR, proportional representation has to govern. And I think that's one area that could enhance our democracy very much in South Africa. The Stubbart Commission made proposals. You don't want small districts. What do you get in South Africa? You get group areas. You don't want blacks voting for blacks, Indians for Indians, whites for whites, colored people for colored people. We don't want that. But we do want some idea of my member of parliament. Who do I go to with my complaints? What can I do? In England, they have these surgeries on Saturday morning. And the MPs do a lot of good work for their constituents, and they know that they're answerable. So that's something that I think...
But are they accountable in our constitution? Do the MPs, are they accountable to the people?
I think one needs the small groups. In many other countries with PR, you have a cut-off point to cut out small parties, 2%, 5%. We don't have any cut-off point. And the PAC wouldn't have got into Parliament. The Democratic Party wouldn't have made 2%. But it would have limited the inclusiveness of our constitution-making process. So I think PR generally is very positive, but it should be combined. And our constitution permits it to be combined, as long as ultimately the representation in Parliament corresponds to the proportion of votes that you got. And you can make that national, provincial, and local. You can get that result, and there will be more direct accountability. Unfortunately, having constituencies doesn't stop the party bosses from controlling. In Italy, they found that the party bosses would give support to their chaps in the district so that they could build houses and roads and all the rest, and if you didn't keep in with them, you got nothing, and the people would be disappointed with you. There's no electoral system that produces pure democracy, but I think our electoral system, under the Constitution as it exists, can be improved. I would be strongly against directly elected president. Mandela would have been elected with a huge majority. It would have favored us in the first elections. We said no. We don't want one individual to be the repository of power in the country. And look at South Africa with our background. We all remember the Governor General, who was the Supreme Chief. And we also remember the traditional leaders who were the most despotic, were the ones selected by Pretoria to remain in power. And we also remember the underground work with commands coming from the top. You put these three traditions together, you can forget about Parliament.
Let me press you a little bit on that, because as you quite correctly point out, there could be two ways of approaching this. The one is that the checks and balances do exist against, as one would call it, abuse of power, because we've seen that now. Abuse of power, there's even talk of capture of the state, meaning getting close to the treasury. I mean, there were moves in that, at least, that the ordinary citizen observed. And you explained quite rightly that the check was, in fact, in the system of Parliament. Yeah, and also the press, the media, civil society, and notably the justice system, the judiciary. These are all checks, and the civil society, churches and everyone coming out and saying, wait, this is an affront to the spirit and letter of the Constitution. But then there's still doubt, and obviously, as you admitted, and as I said to you, people are now interrogating the Constitution. Is this document protecting civil rights? Is it protecting the core of our society? Or are there loopholes? And you explained that very well. But the point is still, I think, and when we now soon give over to you, I hope that will also be interrogated. If the president is defiant, even of the judiciary, and the president goes so far as to say that the legal system that we have, informed by the Constitution, is not for Africa, because it deals with a letter and it's not warm bodies, implying that if the Constitution goes against me, then I will be unhappy. Whereas, as you say, had it been Mandela or Tambo, they should say, hurrah, I've been declared unconstitutional and I step back from it. And offering really a very qualified apology, which says for the inconvenience and the controversy, but not for the core issue. And our people are in this audience and all over, they worry. There's also the matter now that whether he truly reprimanded the ministers. Last night we heard that the minister responsible says it's not him, it's the people lower down. So he's okay, but they must fire people lower down. which I thought was almost obnoxious. And so, is it that we must say, what else is there? Aren't we, as civil society, assuming our responsibility to check power like that? What do you get from, how do you remove a defiant president, not defiant of us or whoever, defiant of the spirit and letter of the Constitution? Do you feel there's enough mechanisms to do that if he just says, I'm not going to? My own sense is I've got an inkling that the public, even his own party's voting public, will have a show at it. But I don't know, because this is unfortunately a weakness of a majoritarian system and also of people who don't interrogate matters at the level that we are. And what protections are there against that kind of thing happening?
You know, the word majoritarian has to be, to use your term, interrogated.
Yeah.
We in the ANC, when I was a negotiator in the ANC, and for anybody who wonders, 27th of April 1994, I left politics. I wanted to be considered to be a judge. And I felt you can't have two loyalties.
Yes.
And it wasn't a problem for me because we were carrying on the same struggle for human dignity, for human rights, but now in a different modality. And it was a continuation, if you like, of our life's work and our ideals. In the event, re-interrogating the term majoritarianism was being used by the power-sharing lobby.
Oh.
Simple majoritarianism, Franklin, was worse than Marxism-Leninism. It was thrown out as, you know, the other side, the ANC, wants simple majoritarianism, which they'd had since 1910. Britain had had it since...
Forever.
Since King Charles lost his head and the Parliament came back again.
Literally.
Suddenly it's seen as a terrible thing when the black people are the majority. Then suddenly majoritarianism is terrible. So we wanted, in that sense, majoritarianism to work in this country. And in a sense, a lot of the student discontent is a feeling that we haven't become a majoritarian society yet. There's still a minority that are calling the shots in all sorts of ways. So I'll defend majoritarianism, but majoritarianism shouldn't be oppressive and shouldn't be limiting. And Parliament now, the parliamentarians are asking themselves, what have we done? As a former judge, I have to seal my lips in terms of what I, as Albie, think about all sorts of things. But it's an open secret now. They got a shock. And they're asking very, very hard questions. Have we lived up to our mandate? They're asking that question. It's not even a secret. It's not even an open secret. It's beyond an open secret. Inside the ANC itself, inside there's serious interrogation, inside and outside. And in all parties now, these questions are being considered and raised. I don't think, myself, that we could have come up with a better system. The one other aspect of the Constitution that wasn't the best way of governing, but it was inevitable, was having the provinces. Having the provinces. Our advice from the Development Action Group here in the Cape was to have strong central government and strong local government. You don't need intermediaries. But we wouldn't have got a constitution. And Carter wouldn't have accepted, the NP wouldn't have accepted. So we had to. And we gave the provinces extensive, at least formal power. So they have cabinets and they have motor cars and they can pass laws. They don't pass many laws. And it creates a lot of confusion in government with now things are going through with some provinces doing very well and some not doing so well. And it's not simply dependent on which party is in office. So Gauteng is doing some extraordinarily good work, and people speak very positively about the Western Cape. Other people criticize very much in the Western Cape. It's not purely a regional kind of thing. But we didn't really have an option in terms of that. So people often ask me, Albie, is this the country you were fighting for? Look at the unemployment. Look at the gap between rich and poor. Look at the poverty. Look at the crime. Look at the corruption. Is this the country you are fighting for? And I say, yes. This is the country I was fighting for, but it's not the society I was fighting for. And that's important. South Africa is a completely different country from what it was under apartheid. Completely different. You know, if I see someone taking notes here, I don't assume it's the security police.
You can never say.
No, it's completely different. The way we walk in the streets, the way we protest.
Yeah.
You know, when I hear students complaining about how roughly they've been treated, it's no excuse for treating them roughly. But compared to, you know, they've still got 2 arms. It's nothing like it was. My book, my PhD at Sussex University was published by Sussex University Press, Heinemann's, California University. It was banned in South Africa. Banned 3 times. You'd think 1 would be enough. It was banned as a book. It was banned because I was banned, and it was banned because it quoted lawyers like Mandela and Tambo who were banned. So in that sense, we've got a fantastic country. We've achieved what's been called a miracle. We've got a great constitution. But a society that, and we can't blame it all on apartheid. We are making our own mistakes. We've run out of feet to shoot ourselves in. And we've got to take responsibility for things that we're doing wrong. But don't blame the Constitution, use the Constitution. Use the Constitution.
As it's being done now. It's being done now.
Whether it's through the courts, whether it's freedom of the press, whether it's through mobilization, whether it's through protest, whether it's through elections. All of these things which the Constitution grants. Don't undermine the Constitution.
But all right, we park that there's a sense after your comments that we, the ordinary citizens, do have power, and it's vested in the Constitution. But we have concerns that if people in high places defy the Constitution, that perhaps there isn't sufficient, even defying the High Court, not the Constitutional Court judgments, then it is a cause of worry. But I'm like you, I share with you that in South Africa, remember the old Kivit said, South Africa progresses politically by disasters and economically by windfalls. That we're not new to disasters. In fact, the whole history of South Africa was one disaster after the other, and every time we came out tops. And this is what, because we, the ordinary citizens, take responsibility for our country, take responsibility for our campus, even for the tiniest window pane. We take responsibility because that little item also represents the sanctity of your struggles and the loss of limbs and the spirit of our Constitution. Let me press you on one more question. Are we still okay? Also, we are here to discuss the Constitution. And something which is also perhaps one could worry about is exactly what you said, that under the slogan, power to the people, power was from a national central level. It was passed down, particularly with delivery. It was passed down to the lowest possible level. And we sit now with the situation, and I'm asking in terms of the constitutional insight at the time when it was written. We now sit with a situation that is doubt with the populace whether municipalities whether perhaps they have too much power. Secondly, that power that they A, don't understand because for obvious reasons, and C, that the resources that should in fact bring relief to the people in economic terms are not properly administered and even in some cases corruptly administered. And there's therefore the question whether the foresight of passing so much power down to the lowest level, considering the physical makeup, the anatomy of that level, whether that was the best thing we could have done.
Maybe the region should have been bigger, in ideal terms. The most worrying aspect of corruption to me is not the corruption that is denounced, and I think appropriately denounced, alleged at least, at the higher levels. It's the routine corruption at municipal level. And the answer to that should be a combination of different factors, but civil society is absolutely vital.
Vital, yeah.
And maybe, you know, we were used to the branches in the freedom struggle as being the centers of achieving democracy. What worries me most about the corruption is not even the misuse of resources, although that's totally unacceptable. It's if people join an organization not because of belief in values and ideals and improving the lives of the people, but if I join the organization, I can become a councillor, I can become the mayor, I can have access to contracts, I can drive around in a fancy car. And that doesn't only mean bad distribution, it's destroying the very heart and soul of the branches and the organization that should be the foundation, the spring of democracy. And the sense I get, without naming any names and identifying any organization in particular, is that's the biggest struggle that's going on in South Africa today. It's not capturing the state, it's capturing the branches. And so we have a hugely dynamic society now. For me, that's terrific. Samora Machel used to say, to know the taste of an avocado pear, you have to cut it in half. Let the contradictions come out, and then you resolve the contradictions, and you're stronger afterwards than having suppressed them. But of course, there's no guarantee that the contradictions will come out and be resolved in the way that you want. But I think there are lots of very, very positive pointers in South Africa today. People are speaking out.
But you know, Albie, on that point, I think a word must go out as well, following on that comment. In the Western Cape particularly, I hear young people boasting, and I hope they're not in this audience. I'm not going to bother to vote. That is the biggest abdication of your democratic right. You have to vote. People lost their lives for a vote. And you must encourage your students to vote, to register and vote, because it flows from the comment that Albie made, that the only block on power, the real one, if defiance happens, is for the people to say, now we use our capacity to stop the rot. Don't rely on institutions. I think, Professor, the last point should actually be our last point. And we cannot go away from this important event, Professor Novatula, your first public lecture in your name. Thanks for that, and it's great. But we can't depart without raising a topic which none of us feel like in our stomach to raise, because our stomachs turn. That's a question of the state of education. State of higher education, 4% of the South African public earn more than 500,000 rand a year. To enter a university for a year cost that parent who is a domestic worker or a gardener or a lorry driver around 100,000 rand. And this is what the system today presented to people like these to govern. and it cuts you, they cut your one arm off, it cuts both these off. It frustrates our students who want to study. It frustrates our academic staff to the point where they sit behind their desk, Anthony, and you calculate when you're going to retire because you can't see a way out. And that's on the one, because it is hectic. When I left this campus after 18 years, the one thing I was relieved about to go is this bloody thing called fees. I took responsibility for fees myself, and I lost my tummy almost to try and meet those demands. That's on the one hand. The second concern in education is that one isn't clear who governs education, who is in charge. Who is in charge? And can we go on, and on top of that, there's from here and there, you have the sense that some of our young people are still imbued with a breakdown rather than the build up. And also where teachers leave as a routine classrooms at 11, 12 o'clock, having come to school late in the morning. And the Constitution must, somewhere there must be a way where the Constitution addresses that. Because like you quite correctly said about corruption, the one threat I feel, I'm very optimistic, I'm not cynical about South Africa at all. But the one thing that bothers me really is how achievable education is for poor people, and how we are going to rescue, particularly township schools, from often, not always, they are excellent schools, from a disastrous education practice. Also, let's be frank, because people talk about this, there's now, the Volmink report is now on the offing, where it shows that unions, in fact, have a brochure where they say this posts will cost you 25,000 rand, where they sell posts, not to the best possible principal or deputy principal, but to the one who's prepared to be corrupted. Now, it's an antithesis of everything you said and everything you represent physically, and your history, and Tambo and all of them, that we sit with this situation, which some even go so far as to say is worse than apartheid education at the ground level in townships. Now, this is probably not a question in the Constitution, but if you talk of the spirit of the education, the frustration of the youth, the inability of you, sir, to meet those frustrations because they're out of your hands. Out of your hands. They want to kill you, but it's not you. And perhaps you just want to make a comment on that, and then we will pass on to the patient audience. I know Professor van der Ross, my big friend, which I love and venerate. When I go to him, his question to me, and he's now 93, what can I do about that? And you won't be happy if I don't voice that question to Judge, to the judge. Thanks, Judge Sachs.
I'm just going to repeat what I said in my inaugural lecture. The beautiful people are not yet born. It's us, it's we South Africans with our imperfections. We take advantage of the opportunities, and sometimes we abuse the opportunities the Constitution gives us. And we've just got to start finding the beauty in our history, in our Constitution, in our struggles, in our achievements, in our educational system, and promote that, and let the ugliness be exposed for what it is. It sounds like abstractions, but sometimes abstractions, imagination, courage, belief are absolutely vital. And I sense in South Africa today a resurgence of optimism now. that things are being told as they are, that there is hope, that the Constitution is in a sense secure, that we have mechanisms to deal with the things that have been grinding us down so much. So let's use our opportunities and let us debate, interrogate, argue, and always be animated by the way I used to put it then. Constitutions are about the tension between perfectibility and corruptibility. And they'll always be there. And they'll always be battling with each other. Let us push on the side of perfectibility. And South Africans have done it before, done it heroically before, done it graciously before, done it intelligently before. And I think we can find the wisdom and courage to do it again now.
If I may add a word to that, particularly as an old hand, students and administration and the Vice-Chancellor, as the judge said now, must work together on this. We can't be fighting each other and hope to advance our cause. We can't alienate our communities by our action, our so-called revolutionary action, alienate them and hope to include them in a civil society. Push for the sanctity of the spirit of the Constitution, but also the letter of the Constitution. And finally, Albie, as a former Constitutional Court judge, your colleagues and your institution has done us proud. And if there's one thing that gave us hope, it is the Constitutional Court. And they've done very well. Even in your time, not even, in your time as well, you've done great for our country. You know, let me just say, which country will, through civil society action, will prosecute and imprison a commissioner of police? Strength. Doesn't matter what your view is about that. The commissioner of police went to jail. I don't know, I haven't seen it in the US of A. What country can say to a powerful president, look, you are killing our people with your AIDS policies, and you've lost our consent to govern. And amongst other things, you should go. And he paid that price for hundreds of thousands of people dying because of terrible policies. And now, too, we're there as well now. And it's all our duty to do two things: protect our Constitution, protect our assets, engage with each other to bring forth these noble thoughts and powerful thoughts that we as a country have generated and have to cherish. Don't break it. Cherish it. Now, are you taking over? I just want to know.
So,
Yes?
no, I thought you were on the last point.
No,
so I'm
no,
here
no.
to facilitate.
No, I just want the thoughts and engagement of the most knowledgeable and brilliant people, because they feel it on their skins, and that's the audience. We retired gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think put your hands together, please. And how many of you agree that this was 1,000 times better than a traditional lecture? So, when I said that CPUT is trying to be a responsive and an engaged university, I think this demonstrates that aptly. And as we now prepare for some probing questions, and I hope you still have the stamina for that, because I certainly did. You know, when we planned earlier on about times, etc., and Judge Sachs and Dr. Sonn said 40 minutes of conversation will be more than enough. But as you can see that, I mean, I wasn't bored, and we could probably go on the whole evening. And as you are sitting, and I'm wondering, what I know there are members from the press here, in addition to the Cape Times, our partner, what will the headlines read out of this? I mean, some of the quotes I noted from here: "This is the country I fought for, but not the society I fought for." "Don't blame the Constitution, use the Constitution." Destroying the heart and soul of the organization, not capturing the state, but capturing the branches. The only block on power is to use your power. And finally, there's a resurgence of optimism. A resurgence of optimism prevails. Faith in the Constitution prevails. Push to the side of perfectibility. Thank you very much once again, our esteemed invited guests.
I want to suggest a line for the Cape Times. Fuddy-duddies, not so stupid after all.
Colleagues, I know, I'm sure people may not have planned to be here till quite late in the evening, but I don't want to do this. We did say that we could, let's not ask questions. I've been called to order. Let's interrogate.
Yes.
Let's interrogate, not ask questions. So I'm going to ask for a round of hands, and let's just see so that I can recognize a few hands. And so, okay. So at the back, where are the roving mics? So with it?
Two ladies.
Okay. So to do this fairly, the bottom half of put your hands down. I'm just going to deal with the hands in the back and we'll come down. So that was the hand there right at the back. One, you, sir, those two hands, 2, 3, and in this row here. So that was the last row in that order, and your hand, Kenneth. Number 4 is this gentleman here, and number 5 with the gray, and the red stripes.
The comrades.
The comrades. Yes. Okay, could I take those 5 and I'll get back to you, sir? We'll start there.
Do you have a pencil and paper?
Can I have that, please? Thanks. I've got a pen, thanks.
Can I continue?
Go.
Okay, yes, please.
Thanks, Comrade Facilitator. If I was elsewhere in another gathering, I was going to say Israeli too, but let me greet you and say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to the VC and the staff of the institution for organizing such a powerful, informative kind of a gathering. Judge, I'll call Albie, your first name, and Mr. Sonn. There's a lot that you have said, and I cannot read every sentence I marked here, but I've made some few pointers around the Bill of Rights, and I said versus the Bill of Obligations, because it is my belief that as we have a right to be voted and to vote, there should be also a line of obligations following that right. What is your thought about that? Because we've been voting people in parliament year in and year out, but we don't see them fulfilling their obligations to look to the voters. Let me pass that. Towards the end, you mentioned things of branches during your times, which today have been replaced by nothing money.
By what?
Money has replaced branches.
Money.
Not only in one party, but in many parties. people are being moneyed to follow a certain agenda of the party, more especially towards conferences. I would need you to also elaborate as to what you think about that, because I don't want to ask you, I want to integrate you, as you said correctly.
Okay, so sorry, I'm going to stop you there in fairness to the other questions
Can I
you
just
asked
do
too.
the last one?
So you're going to be very brief, or
Can I
I'm
do
going to stop you.
the last one? You mentioned something about education, and you were pointing to the tertiary education, but the problem does not start here. It was my belief that education should be a cascaded system. If those who are supplying the institution of higher learning are not doing well, don't expect good results within this sphere of education. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I ask the rest of the people who are recognized, let's be fair to everybody who wants to participate in this. Could you be brief and ask a single question, please, so that we could spread it around? Okay, so yes, number 2 there. Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is very simple and straightforward. Number 1 is around the question during negotiations. I think Judge says he was part of the negotiations process. Wherein I would love to know from him if today he were to go back to that process of negotiations, what is it that he thinks as the ANC or from the ANC they would do it differently in terms of accommodating, because he said he doesn't want to now use a word, a compromise, but accommodate. What is it that he strongly thinks they would do differently in terms of accommodating their counter party? The last question is around the education. On that,
that's 2 questions now.
No. It's one question. The first one I raised. Now this is the second question.
It's A and B.
Okay, A and B, yeah. Now the last question is around the question of education. On that glossy document, Freedom Charter, I think there's a line there that says, the doors of the learning shall be open. I'm trying to think, what was in the mind of the author in terms of financing or funding the education for the African child? Because this issue of fees must fall today comes as a result of a failed plan somehow. What is it that can be attributed as a failure in that regard?
Okay, thank you. I think the next hand is right next to you.
Thank you, Program Director. Good evening, CPUT community and friends from other universities. Thank you, VC, for this opportunity. Let me follow Dr. Sonn's A. Prof and the judge. If I say that the will of the people, the ordinary people, does not find expression in the current constitution, the will of the toiling masses down in Tzaneen, deep rural areas, does not find expression in the current constitution. It's only the paragons of constitutional supremacy that will always shout the issue of constitution. Where I'm going to, the Bill of Rights is very clear when it talks to the issue of human dignity. If you go to squatter camps now, you find children playing in sewage systems. Where is human dignity there? Whilst there are budgets, provided for those specific municipalities. But if you go to Camps Bay, you find each household is having a swimming pool. Each household. But if you go to this other side of the road, as you go in Cape Town, if you want to understand Cape Town, take N2, then make a U-turn in town, then come with N1. then you'll see the difference.
Okay, we
So,
have the gist. Go on to
The
B.
gist,
Yeah,
the
know
gist
question.
that
What's B?
I'm going to is to say that, don't you think that this constitution is protecting a certain sector of the society, which it was designed from its inception to make sure that this sector is even protected even today? Because if it was for the majority, you spoke of the majoritarian principle, we could not have been where we are today, because I believe South Africa has got a lot of money. On grants, we are spending about 162 billion per annum, which means that if we can rethink our strategies, we can move forward.
Thank you. We
very
got
much.
that question. It's a good question. Can we go on to number 4? It was towards the end there, yes? And then number 5 there. Number 4, there's a mic there, right.
Thank you. Very interesting questions. I will take a bit of a philosophical approach in this question.
Okay,
And
briefly,
ask
philosophy
yes,
gets
and
lengthy
ask a
sometimes.
different question here. To say, with the social contract, can't we think about the racial contract as a way of flipping the coin around? Because the issues that we are raising today, inequalities or reproduction of a racialized society, it's kind of rewriting itself in different forms. So my question is this social construct not idealistic? Can't we turn the coin and look at or materialize it, if you like, in Marx's concepts? Or look at the real mechanisms which make things happen in a manner in which they do. It can't be justice. Or if justice means just us in terms of preserving white supremacy, then let it be. But we should know that in our analysis, what is the real mechanism which make things happen in a manner in which they do at the present moment?
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman on your left.
My name is Buila Matuani. I'm a student at CPUT. Judge, I'd make the statement to say, Dr. Sonn said in the beginning, who's revolutionary? And I would assert that the Constitution itself isn't a revolutionary document. It's leaning towards socialist democratic more than it is to a socialist revolutionary document. That having been said, you spoke of a spirit, that the Constitution breeds a certain spirit. And I'd then assert that it not being a revolutionary document, it bred a non-revolutionary spirit. My question is on how the Constitution sought to address intrinsically the systemic institutions of oppression which we inherited from apartheid. Now, it speaks to addressing very passively inequality in our society. So you made reference of it envisaging addressing social equality, but it doesn't really speak to actively addressing systemic institutions of oppression that are existent in our society. And you spoke of alienation, Dr. Sonn. And many of these movements, especially student movements, are born of having an alienated society. And to speak of Hegel, we don't have the time for that, but if we were to speak of Hegel, he speaks of how society and an alienated character in society breeds revolution. So it's not by chance that we have Fees Must Fall movement, or we have a Rhodes Must Fall movement, or all these upsurgence of protests in our society now. And I'll speak to how the Constitution spoke to actively addressing an alienated society that we have today.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll pause there, and I'm going to ask Judge Sachs and Dr. Sonn. Those were 5 questions with sub-questions. They're probably about 7. Yes. Have you noted them, or should we?
I want to pass them on to my learned question, but I would just like to emphasize one point. And that is considering that this is the outcome of a democratic struggle up to the point of, of 94. We don't know what society is going to look like decades from here. But certainly, I want to say we have achieved a great deal. We are a world over recognized democracy. We respect, as Albie said, we respect rights, and it comes from a very deep moral persuasion. But it will never be perfect. And all that I want to say in regards to the comments I made is that we must protect our gains. Struggle for more, that's your right, but protect what you have with your blood. Otherwise, we won't make progress. Under no constitution will we make progress. So, the rest, my learned colleague.
Well, thank you, Franklin. You've dealt with the difficult questions and you've left the easy ones for me. You know, it's hard for me to hear those questions, and I'm glad I'm hearing them. Because they're coming from people who didn't live under apartheid and feel the terrible pains that were oppressive and gross and daily, with an intensity and a comprehensive character and a silencing that's impossible to imagine if you're not in it. It's fantastic we've destroyed that, and that we have the openness that you can stand up and you can speak as robustly and proudly as you do. So I welcome, even if the questions hurt me, because I feel we've got a fantastic constitution. But what I would say is, look carefully at it. Some constitutions are there to preserve a status quo and to prevent dictators and others from taking over. Some constitutions assume that we're living in a good society with a few little imperfections that maybe we must deal with. Our constitution starts with a totally different premise. It starts with the assumption we are living in an unfair, unjust society. And we have to have a constitution, and this was a term that's not in the constitution, but it was picked up very early on by the Constitutional Court. It's now become generalized, but it was the court that first used the term a constitution for transformation. So the constitution is not the enemy. If there's a failure of transformation, if people haven't used the opportunities in government, outside government, to get the changes that we need, don't blame the Constitution. You know, we spent more time negotiating in the Bill of Rights, more time on the property clause than anything else. It's not the longest clause. The longest clause is the rights to a fair trial. But that was relatively straightforward. We put in a bit here and a bit there that was extra. We fought for days over the question of the economic aspects. And many people wanted us to have a right to property and a right to free enterprise in the Constitution. It would have made capitalism a constitutional principle. It's not there. There's no right to communism. There's no right to Marxism. There's no right to a Fanonist kind of view. It's left open for the people to choose the philosophy that they want, provided it doesn't undermine the principles that are in the Constitution. The property clause says no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of property. It doesn't say everyone has the right to property, because that would have been possibly very strongly in favor of the status quo. It says you can deprive people of property, but you can't do it arbitrarily. And then we fought over the compensation clause. First of all, we said land reform is in the public interest. That's in the Constitution. Secondly, we said that state has a duty to provide access to land for people who've been deprived of access to land. That's in the Constitution. Thirdly, we put in restitution of people who'd been, since 1912, removed. they got land back or they got some other kind of compensation. That's very, very unusual. Fourthly, we put in social and economic rights, the rights of access to housing. 3 million homes have been given free to people. They're not wonderful homes, but they have water, electricity, sewage, and some sense of security that people didn't have. It was said right at the beginning in 1912, 1913, in that beautiful book called Native Life in South Africa, that African people are eternal wanderers in the land of their birth. They couldn't even bury their children except illegally when they were on the run on somebody's farm. Most beautiful, wonderful, wonderful statements that some of us incorporated into our judgments on the court. So it's not as though these things are prevented by the Constitution. And when it came to compensation, we didn't say you have a right to market value. That's just one of the factors that has to be taken into account, and the principle is compensation, if property is expropriated for land reform, must be just and equitable. One of the factors is market value. Another factor is the history of the acquisition and use. But the overall evaluation is what is just and equitable. And that still has to be finally determined. And one of the senior judges in the court has said, nobody has ever come to us to determine that. There has been determination of compensation under restitution of people who were removed from the land, but not the principle for expropriation. That still remains very much open. And that's where people must use their democratic rights to get people who will advance policies in Parliament and elsewhere that will secure the kind of redistribution that you're speaking about. The other aspect of the accommodation doesn't just mean being nice. I'm sure he's not fleeing from my words. Imagine when you reach a certain age, nature imposes itself quite strongly on you. So the social contract is that vision of equality for everybody. That's what underlines the Constitution. And if, as people here have pointed out, in practice, there's massive inequality in this country, and it's painful to see, and we see it all the time. If they point that out, they can't say the Constitution is responsible for that, because the Constitution isn't. The Constitution makes equality the foundational principle, and respect for the rights of everybody, the right to dignity of everybody. And if that's not being achieved, then that's a political failure, it's not a constitutional failure. One reason why we made the courts in charge of compensation for expropriation, we'd seen what had happened, for example, in Kenya. It's very well known, it's said by Kenyans, it's said by the Chief Justice in Kenya himself, that people like Jomo Kenyatta had been in jail by the British, held by the British for many, many years. He becomes president of the country. And what happens within 5-10 years, huge swathes of land are owned by the Kenyatta family. The people, the so-called Mau Mau, who fought for freedom, who suffered, who were tortured, who were killed, they got nothing. The Home Guards, and you know what the name for the Home Guards was? The Askaris. The Askaris in Kenya, who had fought with the British, who'd been able to send their children to school and university, they got the land. And the people who'd fought didn't get the land. And we were worried about what was happening in other countries. If you give state officials power without judicial control and constitutional control, the right to supervise redistribution, they redistribute, and who does it go to? Their brothers-in-law, members of their party, their neighbors, their members of their family, and so on. We didn't want that in the new South Africa. Has South Africa failed in terms of land reform? I think the answer, sadly, is it almost hasn't even failed, because failed presupposes that you've tried and not succeeded. Various things have been attempted. We haven't found the way forward yet. And that's something that's very much on the agenda, and it can be tackled in all sorts of different ways. But I come back to the statement that I made, and I'm so glad that we don't only have the people of my age and my complexion who are sitting near the front in this audience. I was so worried that the voices of the new generation were not being heard. And that's the only point, Franklin, where I would like to add something to what you said. We've got to listen. We can't simply denounce the students who do things that we disagree with as people who are irresponsible. There's a passion and a commitment. They quote Fanon. They're idealistic. They're finding their way. Of course, we say you're doing things that are damaging your cause, your support. You are alienating yourselves from what we call the masses, the people, and so on. Maybe your parents are not happy with what you're saying in the name of your parents. They want you to go ahead with your studies and so on. But you are passionate, you are idealistic. I think that's going to be good for South Africa. And I think our institutions are strong enough, including this institution, and our constitutional values are strong enough, and the will and the minds of South Africa strong enough to contain some of the anger, some of the rage, and to see something productive coming out of the interaction between ourselves, our generation, and yourselves and your generation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Sonn and Judge Sachs. Ladies and gentlemen, I am in your hands and I seek a little bit of direction because at this point we've been here for approximately 40 minutes more than we planned to be here. We did say we'd take another round of questions, but I'm in your hands. Right. Right. People are saying we can call it a night.
Yeah.
Okay. I am going to allow just two more, and yes, yeah, but there was the one hand at the back I agreed to. 1, 2, and we'll take the third hand here. 3 more questions, colleagues, and yeah. So that was the one I recognized earlier, and 2 and 3.
You must also consider the age of the people on the stage.
Yeah.
We don't want to fall asleep. Yeah.
Okay. And to all 3 people asking questions, please, 1 question strictly and be brief. Thank you.
And can I suggest people who want to leave, they might have other commitments and so on, should be feel free to leave now.
Okay.
It's been fantastic having you all here, and
okay. Thank you very much. But if you can, please stay. We have 3 questions. We're going to be very brief. Thank you.
My question is directed to Professor Sonn. When you and Professor Gerwel opened up the UWC and the Peninsula Technikon years gone by, it was for social and political reasons. But looking at the opening up that 1994 brought to higher education, unfortunately, we are very, very disappointed. Do you share that view? What do you think higher education should be different to transform or continue the transformation process that you've started and set an example at this institution? And what do you think are the problems for transformation currently? Judge, I forgive you in this question.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2 here at the front, the mic. And
my question is actually directed to both because we've got a practitioner of the law and we've got a practitioner of education here, which suits me just fine. I'm from the Unit for Applied Law and I'm very familiar with Justice Sachs, who's been instrumental in being a mentor in terms of curriculating, advising us on curriculum. Justice Sachs, I walked into the Policy Council of the Law Society of Upper Canada, and the first thing that faced me, or that I noticed, was our Bill of Rights that was framed and signed by you and given to the Policy Council of the Law Society of Upper Canada. And that sort of paved the way for our discussions when I dealt with the curriculum and what we could glean from Canada in terms of paralegalism. We have this particular situation where we have to create these kind of activities in order to bring the issue of humanities and social sciences into universities of technology, which is in actual fact a shame, because we cannot separate the human being from its social context within which it lives. And curricula have to be very, very responsive. It has to be transformative. What advice between the two of you would you give to a DVC academic, teaching and learning, and a DVC research when they have to deal, for example, at the University of Technology with a degree in paralegal studies, which we have curriculated? And Justice Sachs will tell you, I shamelessly pursue the goals that we set for ourselves, and access to justice is one of them.
Okay. Thank you. Is that pure curriculum advice, or is it linked somehow to the constitutional issues?
Absolutely, because
Just
access to justice
curriculum
is central
advice.
too.
Okay, thank you. Kulami.
Thank you very much. I had a number of questions, but I'm just going to stick to the straightforward and simplest one.
Yes.
Dr. Sonn, you had mentioned on more than one occasion about too much power of the president. That's what you actually spoke about. And you actually have alluded to a number of questions related to the current president, and also questions related to the former president, President Mbeki. The question that I have in relation to the Constitution, all being equal in front of the Constitution, around the issue of being recalled prematurely in terms of their time or anything or to that effect, would the same question would have been posed if the presidents were not black? And this is the question around if you look at an example around Constitution, you even look at around the world, the International Criminal Court, in terms of the expectations that it imposes around African countries compared to what it actually does around the world. Invasion of other countries by America, Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So there is that attitude, that supercilious attitude that is imposed when people are not white. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Sonn, Judge Sachs.
I think the two questions directed at me, let me deal with this one first. We had hoped, in listening to Albie, we do recognize that there are different levels of inequality in our society. There's also different levels of people who have traditional claims in a continent that is African, which is often forgotten. In America, I had to remind people that this South Africa is a country in Africa, of Africa. Often people talk still about, I want to go and visit Africa. We want to go and do business in Africa. This is Africa. And you're quite right, the penny hasn't dropped as far as that is concerned yet in our broad public. The question of non-racialism and the way it's understood and makes the movement which gave birth to the Constitution, which underpinned the philosophy, as you've heard this evening, is to many of us sacrosanct. And if by implication your question is that criticism of whoever does what is based on a jaundiced racial view, then I really don't have a response to that, because I would like to park that. That is not the point from which I understand that black people, African people, deprived African people, poor people. I come from Queenstown, so I know. I come from the colored location, and the African location was next to the road, and we're in this road. So I have an intimate sense of that kind of suffering. Joan will tell you I go often through Kailicha, through the Noon, because I want to have a sense, although people tell me it's not dangerous. Those people who live there are only poor. That's all. They're humans. And so I don't depart from that. I say we have a constitution that's sacrosanct. If there's an offense against the constitution, and it's so decided by the highest court, the constitutional court, then it doesn't matter who is in charge, we must keep that person's feet to the fire. That's our civil society duty. And I do not see him or her in racial tones. That is not why I joined the ANC long ago. That's my sense. But we must talk about that. The question is for how would we have done and foreseen. You know, the one important thing, Albie, when we talk about these things, when I listen to you, when I listen to Dick van der Ross from a bit of a previous generation, that we often lose sight of, and that is the question of context. What is the context in which certain events happened? What were the pushes and pulls? What were the threats? And with that in mind, and what is our belief system, we stood up to the regime of the time. And we brought about in our lifetime, I think, we participated in bringing about in our lifetime the society expressed so eloquently by the judge, vested in the Constitution that is world-renowned. What is the way forward? My plea is that that road should be mapped out by the new generation in conjunction, like was in our time. I remember going home on a Saturday morning at 3 o'clock when the students were asleep. I interrogated them. I learned from them, but I also asked them to understand our points of view. And I always said, Anthony, you remember, I govern by consent. I'm at the head of the institute by consent. And if anybody ever feels that I'm not living out their ideals and their idealism, I will leave. And I promise you I will resign. Government by consent of the people. But how the road forward, you must map that out. All I plead for is that you as young people, do it with your parents, because they need you and you need them. Do it with your Vice-Chancellor, because he needs you. You are more important than him. He's here because you're there. But do it together. Help each other. And the job of not alienating people who are older than you is yours. The job we have, not to alienate our youth, Albie spoke eloquently about that, is our job. We mustn't alienate you. We're in this together. And that is my fervent plea. Whether I think we're on the right road, I think so, considering the constraints of the Constitution. But I made that point several. Your Vice-Chancellor, like all heads of institutions, would like to have these engagements, but they're so bogged down by the question of money, which has been left on their laps. And together you should do more to bring about sanity. That, let me just conclude by saying, one day there was a very, very vocal student on the SRC. He died tragically in a crash. And he would in the car crash while he was here. And he would always be so really, really passionate. One day I asked him on the campus, don't you want to come and drink coffee with me? And I said, look, I don't want to talk about the issues now. I want to talk about you. Tell me, who are you? What are you? What burns in your stomach? And then he softened, you know, and he looked at me, he says, I said, are you okay? He says, Rector, can I talk? I said, we're alone here. He says, you see this khaki shirt? And the short pants, khaki short pants? And these sandals I wear? Is all I have. I don't have a second pair of clothes. I don't wear underwear, I don't afford them. I don't have soap, I don't have toothbrush, I don't have. And I want to study because I'm a clever boy. I'm a clever student. And I said, listen, about your politics and how you exert yourself, that's your right. And like Albie says, I encourage it. But I now today adopt you. I'm going to find a businessman to adopt you, and if you have somebody else, 2 others, bring them too. And they will pay, I will make them pay for your studies. And I will relieve you, and it will remain a secret between you and me. Now, those were the conditions. And often, your seniors, the faculty, don't know you're suffering. And so if you feel compelled to act in what generally would consider a destructive way, that's okay. But if you listen to how the Constitution was formulated, the spirit, the thinking, the way forward for higher education must be a result of interaction, of discourse between young people and the people in charge. And they must listen to you. It's your constitutional right that you are listened to. I, in my time, had the unfortunate situation that I had to interact with President de Klerk. Once with President Botha, because they were in charge. They divided up the budget. And I had to convince them that we need a campus like this, that we need a first-class campus, and we must get it. That was the methods at our disposal then in that context. You, as young people, will ask, what is our context, and how do we advance this terrible cause, particularly of money? How do we advance it with our Vice-Chancellor, with our council, and make it a common thread? And if we meet the other campuses, how do we do as Albie and them did with the Constitution? Make a new social contract with education. There's nobody in this country who thinks that the way education, higher education, is funded at the moment, that it isn't really impossible to contemplate. 4% of the public earn more, of South Africans earn more than 500,000 a year. To study, enroll for a university degree, cost your mother and father 100,000. Your father and mother often cannot even understand what that is. And if they don't pay that, they can't register. Not because he says so, that's how the system is. Now you ask me, how do we advance that? We advance it by common action. And take a leaf out of Albie Sachs' personal book. Interrogate. Question. One thing students are good at, they're good at that, but they're not good at sitting down and writing memorandums which they will hand in and ask for discussions around them. Do work around the issue, because that's how the Constitution was born, through struggle and work on everyone's part. You heard here Comrade Sachs talk about working through the night in a kitchen, struggling with a Bill of Rights, pouring it out of his heart. That's the cause. And if frustrations boil over, then it's in a context one can understand it. But that is what I would suggest. Remember always when, comrades, you know, when you talk, remember context. You operate in a context that will never be again. And what are you going to leave for those who come, for your children? What can they say about you? It won't be like that, but they can't fault you that you've done your best. So that is unfortunately my view on the matter as a former rector and a former activist in education. Thank you.
Dr. Sonn. Thanks, Dr. Sonn. Judge Sachs, you'd like to wrap it up?
The only advice I give to people who ask for my advice is don't listen to advice from people like me. This is a great new generation in a different kind of context, and I'm curious about what you're doing. I've told you a bit about paralegals in our day. If any of that is of any use, I'm only too happy. The only other question that I think I should respond to is, are we criticizing our president, previous presidents, because they're black? And that question is asked quite often, and I'm thinking, first of all, who criticized the conduct of our president? Most prominently, in legal terms recently, it was Mogoeng. He's black. But I go back beyond, further than that. In my life, when I grew up, we were taught in schools. In fact, I remember being at UWC when I'd just come back from exile, and it was April the 6th. And April the 6th was the day, for those who don't know, when Jan van Riebeeck landed. It was the holiday for white civilization. It was the one day when you wouldn't see anybody at UWC, even if you were sick. Whatever the reason, you would come to work at UWC because it was a holiday. You didn't want people to feel you were celebrating April the 6th. And we grew up. The whites came, history started, civilization began, and then everything was told in terms of that narrative of white domination. And somehow the world was told, it was somehow natural. The Lord blessed the whites, otherwise it wouldn't have happened that the whites dominated the world. That's the proof. History and nature came together to say whites were superior. And that was natural. And that's what we learned. And then I had the joy, decades later in my life, to see the human being who's held up to the world as the epitome of civilization is a black South African, Nelson Mandela. A kind of respect and adulation from the whole world for somebody from our country with a dark skin becomes now the representative of the new values of the new civilization. And for me, that's something marvelous. And he was a black South African, he was our president. So it's, to my mind, completely untenable to say that if President X is being criticized, it's because he's black. Because our president, Nelson Mandela, was admired and loved by the world and is held up as an example to the world. He was black. And it somehow helped to reconstitute the place of blackness in the world, not just in South Africa. And it filled me personally with joy. Albert, my name Albie comes from Albert. Albert Nzula was an African trade union leader in the Communist Party. He died before I was born. My parents named me after him. Ironically, he would have been named after Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. That's the dialectic of history. The dialectic of history. My mother worked for Moses Kotani. She'd say, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. It wasn't Moses Cohen or Moses Kantarovich, it was Moses Kotani. And then it seemed like a crazy, crazy dream that one day black people could be in positions of leadership, representing our country and achieving fame for our country, our culture, our civilization throughout the world. The term Ubuntu now is being added. South Africa produced to the world concentration camps. It produced to the world the English language, the word apartheid. It produced to the English language the word vuvuzela. But finally it's now produced the word Ubuntu. And I find all over the world people are responding to this, I say this African notion of human interdependence, very deep in African society, that we are people through other people. We belong to each other, we're responsive to each other, and we have to respect everybody, even the murderer and the killer. When we decided capital punishment was unconstitutional, we brought in Ubuntu because our society has failed if people are killing other people. So the answer to your question is no. If people criticize our president or president in another country, it's not because they're black. I can think of some white person, if he becomes the president of a great country with the initials USA, who is super white, he will be criticized, not because he's white, but because he does the things that he does. There's no doubt there's an enormous amount of racism in reporting on our continent. It's an enormous amount of racism. But we don't counter the racism by simply saying that we have to be afraid to examine our own failures. We have to be scared and bung about criticizing our leaders simply because they're black. We criticize them because they're not fulfilling the things we were fighting for, the things the Constitution requires of them. If we criticize them at all, we defend them. If we want to defend them, we have a total right to defend them. But the criticism of people who fail to fulfill their obligations under the Constitution can't be averted simply by saying the people who did that are black. That's not the basis of the criticism. It's because they failed the Constitution, whether they're black or whether they're white. In terms of our Constitution, it's, in terms of majority rule, the vote we fought for, it's almost inevitable our presidents will be black in South Africa. We have the right to criticize, we have the right to use our Constitution, and people shouldn't use blackness either as a weapon to deny the rights of others or as a weapon to defend them if they do something that's indefensible.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Sonn. And yes.
Like, we're so solemn. I just want to tell you the other side of this man called Nelson Mandela and how in subtle and his way he would bring home to people who he is. Sometimes he acts humble, but he knew he was Mandela. I happened to have been quite close to him, and I was on his foundation. So one day we were at his home there, the Tokyo home. And my friend there was then his executive director. I walked in there and he said, "You know what happened now? I just want to tell you quickly. And you're going to go in to say hello to him now, tease him about this." And he said to me, "What happened?" He says, "He had guests here," this is now NM, and he was sitting there in his big chair, very much aware of whom he was. And this friend of mine came in with a telephone. He said, "Madiba, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, sorry to the guests as well, but Queen Elizabeth of England is on the phone. The Queen is on the phone. It talks to your question." So he says, "Oh, give the phone to me." So he sits back. Now there are protocols. If you get a call at that level, then you take the call and you wait for the person on that side to speak. Now I can regale you with stories about what NM thought about that. So he gave him the phone and he sat back in his big chair. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you, Elizabeth? Oh, it's wonderful to hear your voice. Tell me first, how's Charles? And how's Philip? I believe he had a cold. Is he all right now? Oh, Philip looks good, man. He's not so young anymore. You must look after him, Elizabeth. And so he went on. And then the Queen had a chance to speak back to him, and she said, he said, yeah, no, Elizabeth, that could be arranged. What then that was, they knew he was coming to London, and she wanted to personally invite him to come and stay at the palace. And his response was, yeah, tell the palace to call my people. I'd love to stay, then I can see the family. And then she sort of rang off. And then after that, when everything was over, my friends and colleagues said to him, Madiba, you are probably the only one in the world, including Prince Philip, who calls the Queen by her first name. So his response was, oh, she calls me Nelson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sonn, for that light note on which we close this proceedings. I'd like to ask our Vice-Chancellor to token of our appreciation to our esteemed guests. Thank you, VC.
I didn't know that we have to do this.
Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause once again, Dr. Sonn, Judge Sachs. Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to say in closing a few thank yous to, if the deputy editor can please come up as well for the picture. Say a big thank you to our partners, the Cape Times, MCD and their team, L&T Caterers for the catering, Robin Thainsma for photography, Luke and his team for arranging the wonderful facilities and that we see on the stage, Derek, Kurt and their team for the live streaming and recording. And colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, a huge thank you to you for your patience, for coming out here, joining us in this wonderful evening, our inaugural public lecture series, and we really hope to see you at the next one, and keep your eye on the press, the Cape Times, and other sources of media for the next announcement. You're going to like the next one coming up. Thank you. Right. Please join us for refreshments. Could I ask members of the media to please come to the front? We will ask Dr. Sonn. Members of the media, if you could just come to the front here to the stage, or come to the stage, we'll give you a few moments with our guests. Dr. Sonn, please. Yeah. Thank you very much. Please travel safely. Join us for some refreshments.